If you are a fan of 80s action movies, then definitely check out the Kickstarter campaign for my first feature-length documentary, In Search of the Last Action Heroes. The film charts the rise and fall of the 1980s action movie genre. We'll reveal behind-the-scenes footage, exclusive insights and uncover stories never told before by the people behind one of the most iconic eras in cinema. We can only make this project happen with your support, so come and join me on this adventure back in time. Check out the link to our Kickstarter page and discover exclusive limited edition rewards in the description below. For the final top 10 video to run in conjunction with my Kickstarter campaign, I reached out to some of my favourite gaming channels based in the UK to help collaborate with me to bring you a top 10 countdown covering the best video games based on movies from the 80s and 90s as voted by the public. Kim Justice, Slopes Game Room and Larry Bundy Jr. spread the word to find out what was everyone's favourite game. The response was overwhelming, some great choices and some predictable ones as usual, but also titles that weren't direct tie-ins to movies, such as classics like Blade Runner on the PC, Star Wars TIE Fighter and Robocop vs Terminator. These weren't based on a specific movie, so they didn't make the cut, I'm afraid. So to get this list started, I will leave you in the capable hands of Larry Bundy Jr.
Following the advertising model of 1989's Batman, Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy came with a huge merchandising campaign, but sadly didn't match the success of the Cape Crusader. A number of video games were produced, and most of them, well, were rubbish, such as the ports for the Amiga, Atari ST, NES, Game Boy, and even a short-lived Amstrad GX4000. But we got one cracking conversion by Sega for the Mega Drive/Genesis and Master System in January of 1991. A side-scrolling arcade game where players controlled the famous detective through various stages to bring down Big Boy. Tracy could walk, jump, duck, shoot a pistol, and use a Tommy gun to hit enemies and objects in the background, Kabul style-y. Starting out relatively easy, it becomes incredibly difficult, to the point it becomes almost inhumane. But that doesn't stop it from being fun to play. Wonderful presentation and captures the style of the movie, proving a faithful representation of the film, showing us that Sega's Mega Drive was a top contender in the console wars.
So you didn't get Robocop vs Terminator on here. I feel your pain. But don't worry, just because Robocop vs Terminator isn't actually a movie, at least not yet, doesn't mean we can't have one of them on the list, or even both of them. But for now, supreme efficiency and inexorable pursuit rule the day. The Terminator, on Mega CD, managed to crash a car into a station full of cops on its way to 9th place on the list. The Mega CD Terminator is actually quite a lot like the perhaps more famous crossover title. It's by the same people after all, Virgin Games, and features Carl Reese going through levels in both post-apocalyptic 2029 Los Angeles and post-disco 1984 Los Angeles. It's often seen as similar to the more famous and incredibly short Mega Drive title, where you shoot cops 6 times with a shotgun and they still don't die, but it's actually a completely different game with graphics that get a nice upgrade, the obligatory rotten potato quality FMV clips lifted directly from the movie, and a big boost in gameplay. This is a much better side-scrolling shooter. The game came out just before Mortal Kombat made blooding games super fashionable, meaning it lacks the later Robocop vs Terminator's rivers of guts, entrails and viscera. Plus it doesn't have that game's array of weird guns, sticking to the film's pulse rifle, pipe bomb and fully automatic shotgun, but you'll still shoot down a lot of T-800s, hunter killers, and just plain violent thugs. And you'll do so to one of the most flat-out rockin', screaming guitar best soundtracks of the 90s courtesy of Tommy Tallarico. It's bloody amazing, and worth listening to just on its own. Mega CD Terminator is of course one of the few really good Terminator games, at least when it comes to the actual movies. You could have punished us with that dreadful NES Terminator game, or insufferably boring SNES title. The Mega Drive game would have been fine, I suppose. It's certainly one of the most faithful licensed games ever made, that is for sure. But no, You rightly chose the almighty Mega CD Terminator, and any excuse that I have to play this game and play air guitar throughout is fine with me. Not just a great little licensed game, but one of the best games you can get for that thin sitting under your Mega Drive that usually you only use to laugh at Make My Video Marky Mark edition every once in a while.
In 1992, Alien 3 had Ripley battling one xenomorph with no guns, so it would seem difficult to make an entertaining game with no firepower and only one alien. So the programmers said, sod that, let's give Ripley all the guns available to her in Aliens and hundreds of xenomorphs to battle on the prison planet Fury 161 as the backdrop. Alien 3 turned up on the Game Boy, Master System, NES, Amiga, Super Nintendo and the Mega Drive, which is the conversion that makes it to number 8. Its 16-bit counterpart for the Super Nintendo offers more challenges to the player, is a tad more faithful to the film, but was far slower and less exciting than its arch nemesis, the Mega Drive. The Mega Drive version was also ported to the Amiga. Probe Entertainment's release throws you straight into the action as aliens jump at you from every direction, making it nerve-wracking as you are timed with saving all the prisoners before the chest bursters explode out of their rib cages. Very simple and straightforward gameplay, making it easy to pick up and play, but the difficulty ramps up as the action becomes more intense as the levels expand into horrible mazes of confusion. A trusty player's guide will come in handy to navigate your way through the levels. With slick graphics and amazing music from Matt Furness, makes it one of the best games based on a movie for the 16-bit console. In 1993, Jurassic Park took the world by storm, and Ocean Software coughed up $1 million for the license to port the game to the NES, Amiga and Super Nintendo. But the version that hits the number 7 spot is on the Sega Mega Drive, handled by Blue Sky Software and published by Sega, of course. The game was a traditional platformer as you play as either Alan Grant or as a raptor. The fast-paced action may not be groundbreaking in its technical achievements, or throw us anything new with its gameplay, but the game was a solid and competent platformer that captured the magic of the movie, proving a faithful license. Well, apart from the volcano level, I'll let that slide. The SNES port has the nifty Mode 7 first-person segments and puzzles to complete, but was a tad dull, frustrating, slow and lacked a save feature, making it difficult to progress and had to be done in one sitting. As Alan Grant, you have to escape the island and navigate your way through the dense forest and avoid being eaten by the T-Rex as it pops up now and again to have a quick nibble. You can also shoot the dinosaurs with tranquilizers to put the unlucky dinos to sleep. When you play as the raptor, you've broken out of your cage and are on the hunt for Alan Grant, as you've sniffed out his Old Spice aftershave, and you have to battle the security guards and other dinos who get in your way. Giving the player these options extended the game, which was a good thing, because the completion time of each character is a tad short. Also, the game gets extra points for making the T-Rex say Sega. Batman in 1989 was a massive hit in cinemas and dominated the summer of that year, and Ocean Software capitalised on the movie for the 8-bit micros, Amiga and Atari ST, but it was Sunsoft's version for the NES that grabbed the number 6 spot. I know there are fans of Batman on the Amiga out there who may be annoyed it didn't make the list, but seriously go back and play it. The Batmobile and Batwing segments are horrendous, not fun to play. Sunsoft also did a port to the Mega Drive, but it didn't quite match the gameplay of the NES counterpart, despite being more faithful to the movie. The NES version had incredible graphics for the 8-bit console, and memorable tunes to keep you pumped up and excited as you make your way through this tough action platformer. Playing like Ninja Gaiden, jumping off walls like Spider-Man, but thankfully it's a bit more forgiving but still bloody tough. As Batman, you make your way through the Gotham City streets, Axis Chemical Plant, Gotham Sewers, a mysterious laboratory and the Gotham Cathedral Bell Tower. The Caped Crusader comes equipped with 3 projectile weapons, the Batarang, Bat Disc and Bat Spear Gun, but sadly no shark repellent spray. A superb and slick video game and one of the best movie-based games on the classic Nintendo console.
Americans will probably be perplexed to see a ZX Spectrum game so high on the list. But hey, us and a lot of you are British, so what do you expect? And the nostalgia for this one is great, so much so that Robocop on the ZX Spectrum made it all the way to number 5. Some people might wonder where the classic Data East arcade game charted, but, well, it didn't make it. As it goes, the only reason that game exists is because the guys who made the computer game, Ocean, licensed the arcade rights out to them. Ocean Software were the kings of the licensed game in the 80s. They made so many of them. They were so on the ball that they had men in Hollywood looking out for scripts even, meaning that they picked up rights to a Robocop game early on, before anyone knew how big a hit the film was going to be, meaning they paid next to nothing for it. The quality of Ocean's licenses were variable in the extreme, with this being a particularly big example. On the Amstrad it's kinda slow and criminally there's no music. On the C64 it's okay for a while, but then the third level is literally impossible, and if you glitch through it, you discover that the game is actually unfinished. And yes, this was released in the shops. But just like the little boy bear's porridge, Robocop on the Spectrum is just right. Thankfully, Ocean bothered to finish this one, and the result is still a pretty fun shooter that's not exactly the same as the arcade game, but will still satisfy fans of it. Robocop dishes out no end of public trust with his Auto 9 on thugs in the street, thugs hanging out of windows, chainsaw thugs, biker thugs, running flying karate kick thugs, Ed 209 thugs, before finally shooting kin thug Dick Jones through a big glass window at the end. For this you get a single screen text ending before the game continues in arcade fashion. No matter, it's still great while it lasts. That music helps no end. And hey, while the intro music is famous enough to be used in washing machine adverts, the in-game music is awesome too. I fancy that Specky Robocop made it so far low because the game was huge. Robocop on the Spectrum was #1 on the computer's sales charts for a year and a half, widening the success of the movie it came from. The game's heady mix of solid shooting and the odd target shooting and face-matching mini-games made the professional critics swoon, and even if they readily gave 90% scores to that aforementioned C64 game, meaning that they couldn't in any way be trusted, they were correct here. Robocop is one of the more faithful arcade experiences that you can get on a crusty old Specky. It's still a fun womp now, and for you, it was clearly Murphy's most memorable licensed game.
Aladdin, arguably the very best Disney video game ever to be released, not just on the Mega Drive, but of all time. What's better, Aladdin for the Mega Drive or Aladdin for the Super Nintendo? Of course the answer's always going to be the Mega Drive, which is a shame because that Super Nintendo version is actually a really good game, with arguably better boss battles, especially the last one. In 1993, the majority of gamers that owned Sega's best ever console had it by this point, and was blown away by exclusives such as Sonic the Hedgehog, Streets of Rage, Golden Axe, and of course, Castle of Illusion. The jump from 8-bit home computers and consoles to this was mind-blowing for those lucky enough to have this machine back then. And even better, if you was like me, you was a big fan of Disney animated classics too. So whilst Capcom worked on the rather good Super Nintendo version, Virgin teamed up with Sega and Disney to work on this version. Yes, they actually worked directly with the animators from Disney's animated studios, which is why the game looks as good as it does. Virgin had already showed off what they could do with memorable titles such as Global Gladiators and Cool Spot, but this was arguably their best work that the team ever did for the Mega Drive, although if you ask me, Earthworm Jim is actually a little bit better. Regardless, by having Disney work so closely on the game, Dave Perry and the rest of the Virgin team used a method called Digicel to literally scan in original Disney drawn artwork before being touched up to work on a 16-bit system. On top of this, one of the very best composers for the Mega Drive, Tommy Tallarico, did a superb job of digitizing Alan Menken's score and soundtrack onto the Mega Drive's limited FM synth sound chip. Aladdin for the Mega Drive, the third best-selling game for the system, behind Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 of course, has a huge following behind it. And for good reason. Like I said, it's not only one of the best Disney games on the Mega Drive, but probably one of the very best Disney games ever made. Although if you ask me, Mickey Mania is a little bit better. But, you know, that one's not based on a movie. Hold tight, this is gonna get bumpy! Who remembers when video games had the same 4 or 5 audio clips which get used over and over and over again? More importantly, who remembers a time when that didn't matter? I present to you Die Hard Trilogy for the PlayStation 1, or Saturn or PC, but let's be honest, it always felt at home on the PS1, right? Simply because it came out earlier on that system, and is basically the better version. Plus, it's the version that you guys all voted as your number 3 spot. Anyway, I bloody loved this game back in the day when I opened it up on Christmas morning of 1996 on my sexy new PlayStation 1, calling all the family to show off how brilliantly these awesome movies had been adapted into this trilogy of games on one bloody disc.
Look, Nan, I'm running civilians over in Die Hard with a vengeance, and I'm using the window wiper to smear their blood all over the window screen.
Ah, good times. I actually played this game again recently for this mini review, and although the controls are fairly clunky by today's standards, it is still great fun to play. Die Hard Trilogy was released towards the end of 1996, 1 year after the 3rd movie installment. You want an awesome trilogy of games for the perfect trilogy of movies? No, number 4 and number 5 do not exist in my world. Then this is for you. Up to this point, the Die Hard franchise had definitely been no stranger to the home computer and console games of the early to mid 80s, with the very popular, although not very good, top-down original Die Hard for the NES and several home computers. Plenty of games have come along since Die Hard Trilogy, but I think we can all agree that this game left such a good arcadey impression that none of them were able to top it. Not even Die Hard Trilogy 2. The game was created by UK-based studio Probe Entertainment, who worked on plenty of movie tie-ins to date, such as Batman Forever, Alien Trilogy and Judge Dredd. Yes, sadly the Sly movie, not the comic. 3 constantly aging games are crammed onto this disc, with the first obviously being Die Hard. A semi-top-down shooter similar to the NES version in all honesty, but far more forgiving than that game, obviously. And although I don't think this is exactly a walk in the park, like all good arcade games from back in the day, you die very easily and really do need to master each of the levels before being able to really get anywhere within it. Then you got the on-rail shooters, Die Hard 2, Die Harder, which is surprisingly well made considering there are another 2 games filling up the other 2/3 of the disc. And when comparing it to something like Time Crisis, well, okay, it's not that good, but it is still good fun to play. And just like the previous game, you really need to learn the placement of all baddies before you get any good at this game, especially if you're playing with the controller rather than the gun. And finally, my favourite, Die Hard with a Vengeance. Playing it for the first time in so many years, I forgot how hard this game is, and how much I must have played it back in the day. Again, you need to play it low to discover the best routes and all that, because you are gonna fail, and you are gonna fail fast. Unlike in the movie where our 2 heroes run around New York City working out riddles, in this game you need to smash into bins, which apparently hold the bombs, all whilst picking up speed boosts, time bonuses and point bonuses before the whole city gets nuked. It's easily the loosest adaptation out of the 3, but that's fine with me, because just like the other 2, it is great fun. And also, let's not forget, you get to smear civilians' blood off your window screen with window wipers.
Oh yes, Batman returns again to make it to our number 2 spot. Batman Returns, like the first movie game, came with a number of conversions across the gaming platforms, but the Super Nintendo version proved the most popular. The Mega CD release did have wonderful driving segments with some impressive scaling effects, but it comes with the bland platforming levels featured on the Mega Drive version. The SNES port, however, takes inspiration from Final Fight, as you play as Batman throwing clowns against the wall and smashing their heads together, just like in the movie. The SNES port also comes with a driving segment, which is less exciting than the Mega CD conversion, but is a nice addition to mix up the gameplay. Konami provided enough gameplay for this single player experience for it to be highly replayable. It follows the movie's plot closely, and despite the film having less action than the 1989 original, the programmers creatively expanded it to make it a worthwhile adaptation of the film. Big sprites, accompanied with great chiptune music capturing Danny Elfman's score, makes it the best of the Batman Returns video games. It's just a shame the movie's sequel video game adaptation will probably end up on a worst movie license list of ours.
At the number 1 spot we have Red Heat on the Amiga. Who voted for this? Only joking. It's of course Goldeneye 007. Everyone's favourite first person shooter from the late 90s, and a game that proved you could make a fantastic game based on a film. Sure, the other games on the list are great to play, but none made the impact this did when it came out. If you wanted to buy an N64, it was either to play Super Mario or Goldeneye. Arriving a couple of years after the film, most folk remember the game more so than the movie. When the game was released, the first person shooter was primarily a genre for PC gamers. Goldeneye opened it up to a completely new market. It polarised the now standard inclusion of scoped sniper rifles in video games, the game's use of context-sensitive hit locations on enemies, stealth elements, and the introduction of multiplayer deathmatch on a console, making it one of the most addictive games. With its 8 million copies sold, GoldenEye 007 was also one of the most significant titles that helped the N64 to remain competitive with its rival, the Sony PlayStation, but ultimately still lost out. Now if you go back and play it on your N64 with the RF or composite cables that came with it, it will look like a fuzzy mess on modern TVs. I'm sure there's an HDMI adapter or mod available, and some YouTuber will try and flog it to you at $400 dues. With emulation it looks far more impressive for the fraction of the cost. It's an unfortunate shame it never got remastered and re-released. It was on the cards at one point and nearly completed for the Xbox 360, but that was halted due to rights issues. Oh dear, Mr. Bond. Well everyone, I hope you enjoyed the top 10. Personally, I would have thrown in Super Empire Strikes Back on the SNES and Warlock on the Sega Mega Drive, which I thought was a pretty cool game, and criminally underrated. I think I might have to do a Let's Play on that at some point. If you're not following Kim Justice, Daniel at Slope's Game Room and Larry Bundy Jr., please check out their channels below. I will be returning with another retrospective soon to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Die Hard. Don't forget to check out the Kickstarter. You can find the link to the campaign in the description below.